Hi there, Chris here with another fresh tip for you all. In this video, we're going to have a bit of fun here as we are going to work on the little charm for the child from the Mandalorian. Little Grogu here. We are going to repaint that little charm. Now, this is the animatronic edition of this little guy. And the little necklace is kind of like this, it's just like I don't know, it's a gray plastic with like a little bit of sparkle to it, and it's got like some painted little details to create some shadowing and such. First thing we're going to do is we're basically just going to undo the necklace. There's just a simple little knot on the end of the cord that keeps the little bundle together. So we're just going to remove that little plastic end and then remove the cord itself. Now this cord actually is pretty long, and on the figure it really doesn't need to be this long, but I think they imagine probably kids probably want to wear this thing and what have you. Now this little charm here, it is obviously, it's got like a sheen to it and everything like that, and it's really just the injection plastic, and the plastic itself is actually kind of squishy. It actually has a little bit of give to it. I'm going to take a little bit of iso alcohol here and some regular little cotton swabs, as you will, and basically I'm just going to dunk them into the iso alcohol and begin removing some of the paint. Now, in hindsight, you probably don't really need to do this step, as the paint is actually quite thin. It's really not on there. It's not like it's baked on, and I was moving through and pulling some of this paint off. I was just really more curious to see what kind of paint this was, and also if this pulled at the basically the metal portion of the plastic itself. And from what I could tell, everything was fine. So if you want to go through the lengthy process of removing the paint from this little bit of plastic here, by all means, feel free and continue to work your way through. I lost interest in doing it. I really didn't think it was a big factor, and so basically all I did was just go around and scrub up the bit itself just to remove any oils. It really hadn't been handled much, so I wasn't really that concerned about finger oils on the plastic or anything like that. You can see some of the mold lines from where the obviously the parts, two-part mold for this obviously separates the parts, and that little nub you see. A lot of us that work in plastic kits and such, you get those little nubs on the ends, and so I just basically file those down, and I use a blade here to scrape the mold lines down. And I found that actually it was much more efficient, because of how soft the material is, to actually just kind of blade the edge. And then I come in with a fine sanding stick. I believe this is a 120 grit sanding stick, I do believe. And I basically just begin filing down the mold lines. And I go around the horns of this icon, and also up the side of the skull as well. And really, it wasn't a whole lot. It's not like, some kits you get where, obviously the mold lines are just huge and, obvious and everything like that. So I just went around really quickly just to knock the mold line down, especially on the horns, just because it's so visible. Once we have that all clean, prepared, and dry, I'm going to come in with some Stynol Res gloss black. Now I'm going to use an airbrush. I'm going to use a Patriot 105. We're going to spray this at about 25 psi. I'm going to use some little alligator clips here to hang on to the bit. These are just for keeping your hands free, and they got like little rubber ends, so you're not hurting the little part that you're grabbing hold of or anything like that. And of course, it just makes life just a little bit easier. Very quickly here, I'm just going to grab some of the primer and then begin laying it on. Again, I'm not too worried about that layer of paint that is supposed to represent the shadows on the pre-existing finish of the bit. I'm just, again, because it's so thin, and I already went over the areas with alcohol and everything like that. So if there was like a really heavy enamel paint or anything like that, then I probably would have worked a little harder to remove it. But again, I wasn't that concerned with it. And really just a quick pass around the bit, and you can see here how once the gloss primer finishes, you can see how it's nice and shiny now. We're going to come in with some Spastics Mirror Chrome, and we're going to use the airbrush again, still spraying at around 25 psi, and then I begin laying this on. And I really, really enjoy this color. I was concerned that because of the squishiness of this plastic bit, it's not like rubber, but it does have quite a bit of give. I was concerned that there would be breaking and cracking, and I experienced none of that. And so for anybody else out there wondering, how does this paint hold up onto those surfaces? I think it holds up very well. You can see once we have this all nicely even layered onto the model, or the bit, part, whatever we want to call it, you can see there's a little bit of chalkiness on that surface. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a microcloth and basically just buff the surface. Normally I don't have to do that with this paint, but for whatever reason it wanted to do this today, and so just very gently I just wipe the surface and pull that slight dusting off of that surface. Once we're done with that, we can move over to applying a protective layer on top of this, and for this I'm going to use clear coat for mirror chrome. This is basically to spray on top of the mirror chrome. This is a clear finish for these parts, and I found that I think because I was working with a little bit high PSI, it got kind of chalky on me, and in hindsight, normally whenever I do this phase, I usually use Pledge with Future Floor Shine. Now it's just Pledge, but it's an acrylic polish. It's a clear polish, and normally I would go with that, but I was fine with that, and I soldier on. I'm going to use some cheap black oil paint, and I also have my little container here filled with a little bit of mineral spirits just for cleanup and for thinning. I'm going to use a synthetic brush to apply this, and I'm going to put a little bit onto my palette here. I'm going to take a little dunk of the mineral spirits and use that to thin out the paint. And also in retrospect, I probably should have laid a little bit more of a varnish down again with this clear coat. Normally whenever I do this with like protective varnish on a surface, especially on a metallic surface, I usually give a good layering on there, and I found that I think when I was using the mineral spirits, it actually kind of burns into the surface a bit more, so the actual metal actually becomes quite a bit darker. But I actually kind of like that because it looks a little bit more like what the totem looks like itself. In the show, it has a more darker metallic feel to it. So for those of you out there who want to preserve kind of that chrome metallic shine, I definitely would recommend laying a good layer of clear varnish on top before proceeding onto this step, because that mineral spirit will bite into that surface. In the past, I have not had any issues with the mineral spirits biting into the acrylic layer, but for whatever reason, this just seemed to really overly tint the areas. But again, it gives me a nice pewter-like finish, and so I was actually, okay with that. I actually kind of liked how it all looked. I was also using a paper towel to wipe that stuff away, and then of course I switched to a t-shirt as well. Let it dry for about 3 days there, and I just checked to make sure it's not tacky or anything like that. And of course it's pretty darn good. Oil paint can take up to like 6 days to dry, depending on how thick you apply it. Here I'm going to go over to my tried and true method for laying down a clear gloss varnish. I'm going to use a Patriot 105, spraying it around 25-30 psi, somewhere around that. It's kind of rough. And then I'm basically just going to begin layering this on. And I actually do about, I think, 3 passes around the model, and I use a hairdryer between each of the drying phases. You will see sometimes if you lay it on a little too heavily, it'll look a little foggy. Just, again, let it dry completely before laying another layer down, and that'll usually offset that. And you can see it's got a nice bit of shine back to it now. And I actually kind of like the finish now. It actually looks a little bit more like what we see in the show, where it has that more of almost like an old pewter kind of look to it. And it wasn't exactly what I intended, but I was pretty much happy with it at that point. Here I'm just simply reattaching the cord, redoing the necklace, and then of course we're going to slap it back onto little Grogu here, and you can see here how it looks far better than what it did in the beginning of this video. And so there we are. That is the repainting of Grogu's little totem. Is it a totem? A charm? It's his necklace? I don't know. Big thank you to my patrons. Without their support, these videos would not be possible. If you're considering Patreon support, click the link in the description below and you'll be taken off to a magical website called Patreon, where there are varying tiers of support. And a huge thank you to everybody who does. Take care of those brushes, and they will take care of you.